Years before meeting Jeff, my life was shaped by a series of restless choices. Fresh out of college, I moved to a bustling city, eager to make my mark in the corporate world. My first job was in a high-pressure marketing firm where I met Sarah, a fiery and adventurous colleague. Sarah quickly became my closest friend, introducing me to the city's vibrant nightlife and igniting a passion for living boldly. Those carefree days were a whirlwind of excitement, but they also sowed the seeds of a longing I couldn't quite define. During that time, I fell into a relationship with Mark, a man whose charm was matched only by his ambition. Our romance was intense but tumultuous, often marred by his obsession with success. Despite the challenges, I believed we were building something lasting, until the day I discovered his betrayal. The heartbreak was a turning point, and I left the city to seek solace in the quieter suburbs, where I eventually met Jeff. Jeff entered my life like a breath of fresh air. Unlike Mark, he was steady, kind, and unwaveringly supportive. We married after a whirlwind romance, and for a while, life felt idyllic. Jeff's career in finance took off, and we moved into a cozy house that quickly became our sanctuary. I poured my energy into creating a warm home and nurturing our relationship, feeling content in a way I never had before. But as the years passed, the routine of suburban life began to wear on me. My job, while stable, lacked the excitement I had once craved. Jeff's demanding work schedule left me spending more and more evenings alone, and I began to feel the stirrings of restlessness that had plagued me in my youth. It was during one of these lonely stretches that I started working on a collaborative project with Jim. Jim was everything Jeff wasn't: spontaneous, daring, and endlessly fascinating. His presence awakened something in me that I had buried long ago, a hunger for passion and unpredictability. Our professional relationship quickly grew personal, and I found myself looking forward to our meetings with an anticipation that went far beyond work. It was a dangerous path, but I couldn't seem to pull away. Looking back, I can see how my choices were shaped by the unresolved longings and insecurities I had carried for years. The vibrant, risk-taking woman I once was had been subdued by the comforts of a stable life, and Jim's arrival reignited a spark I thought I had lost forever. In trying to recapture that feeling, I set into motion events that would unravel the very foundation of my marriage. Boredom and solitude had taken root in my life, leaving me restless and yearning for something to disrupt the monotony of my routine. Perhaps it was mere curiosity, an urge to test boundaries, that led me to my choices. Jeff's long hours at work meant he was rarely home before nightfall, leaving me to fill the hours after my own workday ended at 4:30. Then there was Jim, confident, striking, and irresistibly charismatic. Working closely over time, we forged a connection that crossed boundaries meant only for spouses. One afternoon, after weeks of teasing exchanges, Jim leaned in and kissed me. Caught completely off guard, I stepped back immediately, embarrassment and guilt flooding my thoughts. We exchanged nervous laughter, but the moment lingered, unsettling and confusing. That kiss stirred something deep within me, though I couldn't ignore the guilt of being married. The tension between us only grew, and soon Jim approached again, his voice filled with earnestness. That moment, it meant something. "I want to do it again," he said, before closing the gap between us once more. Before I could respond, he kissed me a second time. This time, we didn't stop. That day, we crossed a line. Jim had a mischievous energy that was both intoxicating and dangerous. He brought something into my life that I hadn't even realized was missing, a sense of excitement. Suddenly, my days were no longer dull. I began looking forward to every moment we could share. Now, reflecting on everything, I see it for what it was: a colossal error in judgment. I tricked myself into believing that my love for Jeff had faded. There's truth in the saying, "You don't know what you have until it's gone." Jim came up with the idea of taking a trip to Florida together. I should have seen it as a reckless move, especially given Jeff's recent behavior. He'd been distant and unusually quiet, but I convinced myself he was just tired. When I told Jim we should cool things off, he suggested this trip to keep the excitement alive. The thought of spending time with Jim in South Beach, far from everything, felt exhilarating. Somehow, he even persuaded our boss to bring me along. The night I told Jeff about the trip, he came home looking worn out. Dropping his briefcase on the table, he sighed. It was a rough day. You don't seem like it, I said lightly. You look content. I am, he replied with a small smile. And I think you'll be too, when you hear what I have to say. I was curious, but he asked me to go first, so I did. I've been invited to a seminar in South Beach. It's fully funded, and they've booked rooms at the Victor Hotel, right in the heart of the Art Deco district. The only downside is that I'll be gone for 9 days. Is that okay with you? His reaction wasn't what I expected. He didn't seem angry, disappointed, or even surprised. I had braced myself for an objection, maybe even an argument. Instead, he simply asked, "Is this important for your career?" "It could affect my chances for promotion if I don't go," I explained. He walked to the front door and stared out at the lawn for a few moments. His voice was quiet when he finally said, "It's fine." "Wait, are you saying I can go?" I asked, unsure. He nodded, still not looking at me. "Yes, you can go." Relieved, I felt sure he hadn't figured out anything about Jim. If he knew, surely he wouldn't have allowed this. Giddy with excitement, I called Jim immediately. "Jeff said I can go to Florida with you." I laughed, barely able to contain myself. But when I turned around, Jeff was standing silently by the table, watching me with an unreadable expression. When our eyes met, he turned and walked out the door. I felt a pang of guilt, but quickly brushed it aside. That evening, Jeff sat alone, staring out the window in silence. I should have recognized that something was wrong, but I was too distracted by my own plans. If I had paused to think, I might have understood what he was feeling, but I was too eager to leave. Jim offered to drive me to the airport, but Jeff insisted on taking me himself. The car ride was quiet and tense. Jeff's behavior felt off, but I told myself it was just his way of dealing with my absence. "Are you upset about me going?" I asked tentatively. "I'll miss you, that's all," he replied. At the airport, Jim greeted me warmly, kissing me on the cheek and saying something about taking care of me. Jeff's glare sent a chill through me, but I quickly reassured him. "He just means he won't let anything happen to me." Jeff's voice was cold as he replied, "I know exactly what he means, Lauren." I felt a wave of relief when he turned to Jim and added, "Thank you for looking after her." But just as I was about to head through security, Jeff pulled me back. "Leaving without saying goodbye to your husband?" he asked. I hugged him and kissed him on the cheek. "Of course not. I'll miss you." He held me tightly. "Lauren, I need to say this before you go. We've never been apart for this long, and I want you to know, I've loved you since we were teenagers. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. If anything happens, I want you to remember that." "I love you too," I replied mechanically, desperate to get through the gate. But Jeff wasn't done. He grabbed my hand. "Lauren, I know I said it was okay for you to go. But now, standing here, I realize I don't want you to. It's not too late. Tell him you can't go. Come home with me." "Jeff, you know I can't back out now. The tickets are bought and my boss is counting on me." "I know I'm being selfish," he said, his voice trembling. "But I don't want you to leave." I felt a surge of anger when, at the very last moment, Jeff told me he didn't want me to leave. His timing couldn't have been worse. I didn't stop to think about his feelings for even a second. "Jeff," I said firmly, "I have to go. Please don't try to change my mind. I've already decided. This trip is important, and Jim needs my help. I can't let him down." When I looked at him, his expression stopped me in my tracks. He looked utterly defeated, like he was on the verge of losing someone he cared deeply about. His sadness was almost tangible, and for a fleeting moment I considered staying behind. But the pull to be with Jim was stronger. I turned away, handing my license and boarding pass to the gate agent. The agent, who had clearly overheard our exchange, glanced at my license and remarked softly, "He really loves you." I glanced at Jim, then back at her. "I think he does," I replied curtly. As I reached for my documents, her gaze lingered on me, filled with a kind of sorrowful knowing. "He doesn't know, does he?" she asked quietly. "What are you talking about?" I snapped, irritated. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "When he finds out, it'll break his heart." "You don't know what you're saying," I retorted, grabbing my things. But before I could leave, she caught my hand and leaned in closer. "When he learns the truth, it won't just break his heart, it'll break yours too," she murmured. Her words hit harder than I wanted to admit. As she released my hand, she added, "The man behind you loves you deeply, and the one over there, he'll only leave you shattered." Shaken, I walked past the rope line where Jeff and Jim stood waiting. Jeff's eyes searched mine, his concern evident. He had always been attuned to my moods, and he clearly sensed that something was off. I gave him a quick look, silently willing him to drop it. Jim, on the other hand, remained oblivious. He had no idea anything was wrong. Jeff stayed to watch us pass through security. After going through the scanner, I turned to wave goodbye, but Jeff was gone. It struck me as odd, but I quickly dismissed it and focused on the trip ahead. The flight itself was uneventful, but left me feeling strangely alone. Jim fell asleep almost immediately, leaving me to mindlessly watch in-flight TV until we landed. Once we arrived, we checked into our hotel room. The bags were barely unpacked before we were in the shower together, the water cascading over us as we gave in to our desires. Afterward, as Jim started unpacking, I decided to call Jeff to let him know I'd arrived safely. I dialed our home number, but there was no answer. A gnawing worry crept in as I tried again and again without success. Jeff's words from earlier, about not seeing each other again, echoed in my mind, unsettling me. Finally, around 8 p.m., my phone rang. It was Jeff. "Hey, honey," I said quickly. "I've been trying to reach you. I was worried when you didn't answer. Where have you been?" "I went out with some of the guys from work," he replied casually. "They were talking up a new club, so I tagged along." His nonchalant tone caught me off guard. Jealousy flared within me. If I was cheating, could he be doing the same? "You'd better not be hitting on anyone, Jeff," I said sharply. "Remember, you're a married man. I wouldn't be able to forgive you for something like that." "Why would you even think that?" he asked, his voice steady and calm. "Have I ever given you a reason to doubt me? You know me better than anyone, Lauren. I could never hurt you that way. And I know you wouldn't hurt me like that either. That's why I trusted you enough to let you go on this trip. I trust you with my heart, my life. You understand that, don't you?" "Of course," I lied, my voice betraying none of the guilt gnawing at me. I didn't know why I said it. "I know you'd never do anything to betray me," he continued gently. "You're the one person I can count on." Feeling trapped, I tried to change the subject. "Jeff, I'm just exhausted from the flight. Let's talk tomorrow, okay? I'll be in a better mood." "Sure, Lauren, we can talk then," he replied. "Good night, Jeff. I love you," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I needed to tell him, even if I didn't fully understand why. Maybe it was because, despite everything, I didn't want to lose him. "Good night," he replied. But as I hung up, a thought struck me. Did he say he loved me back? He usually did. Maybe I just missed it. The uncertainty lingered. After the call, Jim and I spent the night together again. This trip was supposed to feel like freedom, like an escape. The next morning we had breakfast and decided to spend the day by the pool. I'd packed 2 special swimsuits for the trip. Choosing the more conservative option, I slipped into a red bikini with a revealing top and strip-style bottoms. I knew Jim would love it. As I looked at myself in the mirror, a nagging thought crept in. Jeff's face, his sadness, his words, lingered in my mind. But I pushed it aside, determined to focus on the moment at hand. I walked ahead of Jim as we approached the pool, relishing the feeling of his admiration. It was fun to know I had impressed him. We settled into 2 sun loungers, soaking up the warmth of the sun. As we lounged, Jim began discussing the seminars we'd be attending starting Tuesday morning. Then, without warning, he leaned over and kissed me. One kiss led to another, and soon I turned to him and asked, "Want to head back to the room?" His face lit up, and he eagerly helped me gather our things. Hand in hand, we left the pool, looking every bit like a couple in love. After dinner, we returned to our room to wait for Jeff's nightly phone call. But the call never came. Strangely, I felt a simmering anger that he hadn't reached out. My irritation grew, and poor Jim bore the brunt of my mood. There would be no closeness for him that night. The next morning, we got up early and decided to take a walk along the boardwalk at Lummis Park, hoping to spot a few celebrities enjoying the beach. Unfortunately, there was no one worth recognizing. As we left the park, which was conveniently located across the street from our hotel, my phone rang. Seeing Jeff's name on the screen, I hesitated, still annoyed about the missed call the night before. Jim noticed. "Who's calling?" he asked. "That fool," I said with a laugh, making light of it. Jim chuckled along with me. I added, "I should probably answer. It might be important. Why else would he call this early on a Sunday morning?" I picked up the call. "Jeff, is everything all right? Did something happen?" "No, nothing happened," he said. "I was just feeling lonely and wanted to hear your voice. It's nice to know you still care about me. I think about you all the time." "Jeff, it's Sunday morning," I snapped, my voice rising in frustration. "You didn't call last night and I thought something terrible had happened. You scared me half to death." There was a pause, and then his voice, quieter and tinged with hurt, came through. "I didn't mean to bother you, Lauren. I miss you. Talking to you usually makes me feel better. I'm sorry for intruding." Before I could respond, he hung up. I stared at the phone in disbelief, then turned it off and walked to a nearby bench. "What did he want?" Jim asked as he joined me. "He was lonely and wanted to talk," I muttered. Then, almost to myself, I added, "Why did I lash out at him like that?" Jim didn't miss a beat. "Lauren, we've been doing this for 6 months now. Maybe you're starting to lose interest in him. Maybe it's time to end things. Get a divorce. Then we could be together for real. No more sneaking around." I shot him a sharp look. "Oh, really? And what about your wife? Think Jane would be okay with us playing house at your place while your kids are upstairs doing their homework? Come on, Jim, let's be real." I smirked, my tone turning icy. "You make $38,000 a year. Jeff makes almost $200,000. And that's not even counting his bonuses. He's smart, driven, and on track to be CEO someday. I'm not giving that up. Besides, you're not leaving Jane and I'm not leaving Jeff. So drop the divorce talk." Jim nodded, a sheepish grin on his face. "Fair enough. But that doesn't mean we can't enjoy what we have while we're here, right?" "Exactly," I replied, my smile warming as I took his hand. Together, we headed back to our room. After a nap and some closeness, we decided to return to the pool. "I have a special outfit for the pool today," I teased as we prepared to leave. "I think you'll like it." Wearing a tangerine cover-up, I kept the outfit hidden until we reached the pool. Jim was clearly eager, but I refused to reveal it until the perfect moment. Once we arrived, I stood with my back to him, then slowly removed the cover-up. "Well?" I asked, laughing. "What do you think?" Jim grinned. "I think it's perfect." Before he could say more, a hotel staff member approached us, looking uncomfortable. "Miss," he began, "we've received complaints about inappropriate attire at the pool. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to cover up." I turned, confused, and saw 2 parents with young children glaring in our direction. Embarrassed, I quickly grabbed my cover-up and slipped it back on. We left the pool area and returned to the room, where we found solace in each other again. Later, I woke up to find Jim on the balcony, wearing one of the plush hotel robes. We shared another intimate moment before the phone rang. I signaled for Jim to be quiet as I answered. "Jeff?" I said, trying to sound calm. "Lauren?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Are you okay? You sound strange, and it took you a while to answer. You seemed out of breath." Thinking quickly, I replied, "I was in the shower and rushed to grab the phone. You should see me now, sitting here wrapped in a towel. I bet it'd give you a few naughty ideas." He chuckled softly. "I'm sure it would. I just wanted to check in and hear about your day. How are the seminars going?" "They're good, Jeff," I lied smoothly. "Everything's running smoothly. How about you? How's your day been?" "I've been feeling down," he admitted. "I miss you. I miss hearing your voice, holding you close, waking up next to you. The bed feels so empty without you. But you already know how that feels, don't you?" The weight of his words lingered long after we hung up. For a moment, guilt stirred within me, but I quickly pushed it aside and returned to the distraction of the life I was creating here in Florida. That was all I managed to hear. Jim interrupted, pulling my focus away from the phone call. Frustrated, I moved the phone away from my ear, covered the receiver, and hissed, "Be quiet." He backed off, and I raised the phone again, trying to pick up where I'd left off. "Yes, Jeff, that's right," I lied, my voice as steady as I could manage. "Listen, I'm freezing here and soaking wet. I need to go now, but we'll talk tomorrow." "I love you," I added automatically at the end of the conversation. "Right," he replied sarcastically. "Goodbye, Lauren." Then he hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand for a moment before placing it on the nightstand. Sitting down on the edge of the bed, I hugged my knees to my chest. Something about that call felt wrong. Jeff's tone, his response, it didn't sit right with me. Damn Jim. His interruption had thrown me off, and now I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. I considered calling Jeff back, but Jim broke into my thoughts. "What's with you, Lauren?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "You look like you just lost your best friend." "Maybe I did," I muttered. Something was off about Jeff's call. I have this terrible feeling that he knows about us. This is the second time he hasn't said he loves me before hanging up. That's never happened before. Not once. The first time was Friday. I thought maybe I missed it, but tonight I know he didn't say it. If he knows, it means he figured it out before I even left for this trip. And you said it yourself. If he knew, he wouldn't have let me come. Jim leaned against the door frame, looking unconcerned. "There's no way he knows. Think about it logically." I nodded, trying to convince myself he was right. Jeff couldn't possibly know. Still, a nagging doubt lingered, refusing to let me relax. Jim made it clear he wanted closeness, but I wasn't in the mood. The next morning, we got up early for the first day of the workshops. By the time we returned to the hotel that evening, we were both too exhausted to do anything. Jim fell asleep quickly, while I sat waiting for Jeff's call. When it didn't come, frustration built up inside me. By 11 o'clock, frustration had turned into fear. Was Jeff deliberately avoiding me? Should I call him instead? I decided against it. It was too late anyway. On Wednesday, the pattern repeated. After another long day of workshops, Jim and I returned to the hotel. We ate dinner, showered, and settled in. Jim, feeling refreshed, tried to coax me into bed, but I couldn't focus on anything except waiting for Jeff's call. When it didn't come again, I was horrified. Jeff had never gone 2 nights in a row without calling me. Even Jim started to seem uneasy. His wife called him every single day, and now even he was beginning to question things. By Thursday evening, panic had fully set in. At 9 p.m., when I still hadn't heard from Jeff, I decided to call my mom. "Mom," I began, my voice unsteady. "I haven't heard from Jeff since Monday. Can you check on him at home?" She agreed immediately. "Of course, I'll head over now." About 30 minutes later, my phone rang. The caller ID showed our home number. My heart leapt as I answered, hoping it was Jeff. "Jeff, I'm so glad you called. Are you okay?" I blurted out. "It's me, Lauren." My mom's voice came through instead. "Jeff's not here. I searched the whole house. There's no sign of him. All his clothes are still in the closets, and his office looks untouched. What's going on?" I forced a calm tone. "Nothing," I lied. "We had a little argument, and I think he's upset with me. I'm sure everything will be fine once I talk to him. Thanks for checking, Mom." Her concern deepened. "Lauren, this doesn't sound like him at all. Did you say or do something to make him act this way?" "It's nothing like that, Mom," I said quickly, trying to deflect. "Just let me know if you hear from him, okay? Thanks again. I'll see you when I get home." There was a pause before she responded reluctantly. "Okay. I miss you, honey. Can't wait to see you on Saturday. Good night." "Good night, Mom," I replied, hanging up and sinking into the nearest chair. After hanging up, my worry deepened. Where could Jeff possibly be? Why wasn't he home? I decided to leave him messages, both on his cell phone and our home number. My voice wavered as I pleaded with him to call me back. I assured him we could work through anything, but begged him not to do anything drastic. For the first time, I began to feel like my marriage might truly be falling apart. Friday crawled by, each hour dragging endlessly. Unsurprisingly, Jeff didn't call that evening either. I tried his cell and the home number again, but both went to voicemail. I left more messages, but the silence was deafening. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios, and Jim could sense my tension. He didn't push for anything that night, and I spent another restless evening, unable to shake the growing dread. Saturday morning arrived, and I was up before sunrise, ready to leave. I packed my belongings in silence, dressed quickly, and waited for Jim to wake up. By 11 a.m., we were heading to the lobby to check out. As we exited the elevator, my eyes drifted to the front desk. The clerk there picked up the phone, spoke briefly, then hung up with an expression I couldn't quite place. I brushed it off as paranoia. When we approached the desk, Jim handed over our room keys and credit card to the man, whose badge read, Carlos. He processed everything efficiently, handing back the credit card along with a receipt for Jim to sign. Then Carlos spoke, and his words turned my world upside down. Mr. Beckman, Mrs. Carlson, I trust your stay at the Victor Hotel was enjoyable. We hope to welcome you back again soon. I froze. My breath caught in my throat as his words sank in. What did you just call me? I asked, my voice sharp. Mrs. Carlson, he repeated, a sly smile creeping onto his face. Why would you think that? I demanded, trying to maintain my composure. In response, Carlos calmly placed 2 photographs on the counter. One showed Jim sitting in the hotel restaurant. The other was of me, without top by the pool on that ill-fated day. My stomach churned as Carlos began to explain. A man came to me earlier this week and asked if I recognized these photos. I told him you were registered under the Beckmans. You've made quite an impression here after your little poolside performance. But he insisted the man in the picture was Jim Beckman, and the woman wasn't his wife, but Lauren Carlson, his wife. Panic set in. Jeff was here when? I blurted out, barely able to think straight. Carlos raised an eyebrow and began typing on his computer. Let me see. It looks like Mr. Jeff Carlson checked in last Friday at 4 p.m. and left on Tuesday around noon. Oh my God, I whispered, turning to Jim. He was here the entire weekend. Carlos didn't miss a beat. So you are Mrs. Carlson then? Yes, I admitted quietly, shame creeping into my voice. Perfect. In that case, I have something for you. Carlos handed me a plain envelope, his expression unreadable. I opened it with trembling hands and found a folded note inside. The message was brief and cryptic. Lauren, sorry, half Duke. The words made my head spin and my legs wobbled. Jim grabbed my arm to steady me as I clung to him, trying to regain control. Once I could breathe again, Jim took the note from me and read it. His face darkened and he muttered, We need to leave, now. Before we could retreat, Carlos stopped us once more. Oh, and Mr. Beckman, this is for you. He handed Jim another envelope. Jim hesitated, his hand lingering midair, before snatching it reluctantly. He unfolded the note and read it silently. His body stiffened, and without a word, he turned toward the large window overlooking the street. The paper fluttered from his hand to the floor. I bent to pick it up, my heart pounding. The message read, You thought you'd escape this? Pathetic. I spent the morning with your wife, showing her everything. This is just the start. I'll make sure your life is miserable. Jim stood frozen, staring out the window, as I gathered the notes and photos. As I slipped them into my bag, I saw Carlos reach for the phone again. Yes, sir, he said into the receiver, a satisfied tone in his voice. It played out exactly as you expected. Thank you for choosing the Victor Hotel. It's been quite an eventful visit. Goodbye, sir. I turned to Carlos. Was that my husband? I asked, though I already knew the answer. His smirk was all the confirmation I needed. Jim, we have to go, I said urgently. On the way to the airport, I called my mom, desperate for a sense of stability. I asked her to meet us at Kennedy Airport when we landed. Isn't Jeff picking you up? She asked, confusion evident in her voice. I don't think so, I replied hesitantly. We had a fight, and he's really upset with me. Honey, Jeff wouldn't leave you hanging. What exactly was this fight about? She pressed, her tone growing sharper. Nothing serious, Mom. Don't worry about it, I lied. Lauren, this doesn't add up. For him to not call or pick you up, it must have been something serious. Then, after a pause, her voice dropped. Oh my God, Lauren, what have you done? Tears welled up in my eyes, and I started to cry. I didn't do anything that can't be fixed. Please, Mom, just meet me at the airport in case Jeff doesn't show. If this is what I think it is, Lauren, he won't be there, she said with an edge of finality. Don't worry, I'll come get you. Then she hung up. The rest of the trip to the airport passed in a haze. The taxi ride, the security lines, even boarding the plane, it all felt distant, like I was moving through a dream. It wasn't until the plane was in the air that reality began to settle in, and the weight of what had just happened pressed down on me like a crushing tide. Once I regained my composure, I pulled out the photos of Jim and me. It was obvious they were taken on Monday. Jeff must have been there, witnessing what happened between us. I studied the image of Jim more closely. He was seated in a booth, wearing a black shirt, the same one he wore Monday night at the hotel restaurant. A cold realization swept over me. The man I vaguely remembered wearing a Mets cap and holding a camera had to have been Jeff. If he'd seen everything, there was no denying the possibility of divorce loomed over me. One line in Jeff's letter gnawed at me. He referred to himself as a nerd. I had only ever called him that once, during a tense phone call on Sunday. Could he have overheard or even recorded our conversation? The thought made my stomach churn. I dreaded imagining what else he might have captured. Part of me clung to the faint hope that he'd still be at Kennedy Airport waiting to take me home. But deep down, I knew the chances were slim. Jim sat silently by the plane window, staring out at nothing. Every glance I stole at him revealed the same blank, lost expression. I wasn't any better. The flight home was a blur as I sifted through the photos and letters, replaying Jeff's phone calls in my mind. If he had been in Miami, what had he seen? What had he overheard? Ignorance felt like a cage, keeping me trapped in a spiral of dread. The memory of our last phone call haunted me. I'd missed something in his tone that now seemed vital. Jim's interruptions during that call filled me with regret. I should have been more attentive. Replaying everything in my mind was futile. The truth would only come to light when I saw Jeff again. When the plane landed, I bolted off, barely noticing my surroundings as I rushed through the terminal, desperate to find him. Reaching the ramp that led to the arrivals area, I whispered a prayer under my breath. But when I emerged, it wasn't Jeff I saw waiting. It was my mother. "Is Jeff here?" I asked, the hope in my voice already fading. Mom shook her head gently. "No," she replied, her tone guarded. Jim followed a few steps behind me, scanning the crowd for his wife. His shoulders slumped as he realized Jane wasn't there. He pulled out his phone and called her. "Jane, it's me. Can you come pick me up?" he asked softly. A long pause followed before he ended the call with a defeated sigh. "She hung up," he said, his voice trembling. "She's not coming." He walked to a nearby bench, sat down and buried his face in his hands. I could tell he was crying. My mother, ever the caretaker, approached Jim and placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Come on," she said gently, glancing at me. "I'll take you both home." The drive to my house was painfully quiet. Mom threw me occasional glances full of disapproval, while Jim stared out the window, silent tears streaking his face. The weight of our mistakes pressed down on both of us, and it was clear he felt the same regret I did. The trip had been a disaster, one that had cost us both far more than we ever imagined. When we reached my house, I hesitated. I wasn't sure what to expect. I told Jim to wait in the car, knowing a confrontation between him and Jeff would only make things worse. Taking a deep breath, I walked inside and called out, "Jeff, I'm home." Silence. "Jeff, are you here?" I called again, my voice echoing through the empty house. Still nothing. I searched every room frantically, my panic rising with each step. When I reached our bedroom, my heart sank. His closet was empty, his drawers cleared out. My chest tightened as I rushed past my mother, who stood by the dining table, and ran to Jeff's office. That, too, was completely empty. He was gone. The realization hit me like a brick. He'd had 4 days to prepare for this, and he'd used that time to remove every trace of himself. Sitting down in the living room, I tried to wrap my head around it. What else had he done? What other surprises were waiting for me? My mom stepped forward, holding an envelope in her hand. She passed it to me without a word. On the front, in Jeff's unmistakable handwriting, were the words "divorce papers." My stomach dropped. Then she handed me a small jewelry box with a note attached. It read, "If you want answers, watch the DVD." Mom had already removed the disc from the box. She walked over to the TV, inserted the DVD, and grabbed the remote. She was about to press play when Jim appeared in the doorway. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice hesitant. "No," I said flatly. "Jeff's gone. His things are gone. It's over." Jim sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping. "I'm sorry it's come to this," he said quietly. "I'll call a taxi and wait outside. I need to go home and try to fix things with Jane. I don't know if I can, but I have to try." I watched him leave, thinking about his children and hoping he could salvage his family. After Jim was gone, my mom hit play on the DVD. I sat beside her as the screen flickered to life, showing everything Jeff had filmed during his trip to Miami. Every mistake I'd made, every betrayal was there in stark detail. Tears streamed down my face as I turned to my mother. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I don't know how I let it get this far." She didn't say anything. Her silence and the look of sheer disappointment on her face was more devastating than words. As I watched my actions play out on the screen, shame consumed me. My mother had to witness this. My choices, my selfishness, my betrayal. The weight of it all crushed me. And for the first time, I truly understood the depth of what I'd lost. The next part of the DVD was the hardest to watch. There was no video, only audio, but Jeff had clearly recorded his side of a phone call we'd had. "You sleep alone at night, don't you, Lauren?" Jeff's voice cut through the silence, filled with icy bitterness. There was a muffled response, likely Jim speaking in the background, before Jeff repeated more forcefully, "Lauren, are you there? You sleep alone, right?" His tone was so sharp, so venomous, that if I'd heard it properly during the call, I would have known then that he was on to me. But thanks to Jim distracting me that night, I'd missed it entirely. All I'd said in response was a casual, "That's right, honey. That's true." The video resumed as the camera wobbled, apparently being taken off its tripod. The view shifted until it was set down on a table, aimed at the sliding glass door leading to a balcony. Jeff appeared on screen, packing up the tripod with slow, deliberate movements. For a moment he froze, staring into the dark void beyond the balcony, his face lined with exhaustion and grief. Then, with a suddenness that startled me, his shoulders shook and I realized he was crying. He tried to stifle it, wiping his face with the hem of his t-shirt, and muttered under his breath, "This is the second time she's done this to you, Jeff. Never again. Never again." The screen abruptly went black as Jeff shut off the camera. That was the end of the video. It had done its job, leaving me utterly broken. My mother sat beside me, quietly weeping. Her head was bowed, and her tears flowed freely. But even her pain couldn't compare to the guilt and disgust I felt as I watched Jeff's anguish unfold. Seeing his tears filled me with a shame so profound it felt like a physical weight. When he said, "This is the second time," confusion mixed with the horror. I hadn't realized until now that Jeff had cried over me before, and when he said, "Never again," fear coursed through me. I had destroyed my marriage, and the damage might be irreparable. Mom broke the silence. "So, what are you going to do now?" she asked bluntly. "Are you going to try to save your marriage, or are you planning to run off with that man?" "God, no, Mom. I love Jeff," I replied, my voice trembling. "I want to save my marriage. I'd never leave with Jim. He's married with kids. He's not leaving them." Mom's eyes narrowed. "This isn't just about what you want, Lauren. Jeff's the one who'll decide if this marriage can even be saved. He's had plenty of time to think, and the divorce papers on the table are a pretty clear sign of where his head's at. If you're serious about fixing this, you need to talk to him. Soon. He's already miles ahead of you." As soon as my mom left, I picked up my phone and dialed Jeff's number. He hadn't answered any of my calls all week, and I wasn't sure this time would be any different. But to my surprise, he picked up after the second ring. His voice, though, was devoid of any emotion. "Lauren, what do you want?" he asked, his tone flat. "Jeff, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Please, will you talk to me?" "When?" he replied, still emotionless. "Tomorrow. Whenever works for you," I said, barely above a whisper. "Tomorrow at 2. he said curtly. "Goodbye." And with that, he hung up. His tone left me cold. There was no anger, no passion, just an unsettling detachment. It felt as though he'd already made up his mind, and I was simply an obligation to be dealt with. The next afternoon, I watched nervously as his car pulled into the driveway. Instead of coming through the front door, he walked around the side of the house and entered through the back. I hurried to the kitchen and sat at the table, where I'd laid out a place setting in case he wanted to eat. Jeff walked in, his expression unreadable. He seemed surprised to find me sitting there. "Hello, Jeff. Thank you for coming," I said, trying to sound composed. He gave a small nod and sat down, his eyes flicking to the table setting before returning to me. His face was blank, but his silence spoke volumes. "You wanted to talk. Start talking." "I thought you might be hungry," I said, gesturing toward the table. "I can make you something if you'd like." "I've already eaten," he replied, pushing the plate aside. His gaze sharpened. "What do you want to say, Lauren?" I swallowed hard and began. "Jeff, I need to tell you how sorry I am." He opened his mouth, but I cut him off before he could speak. "I know what you're thinking, that I'm only sorry because I got caught, right?" His expression didn't change, but I could tell I'd hit the mark. "Yes, I'm sorry I got caught," I admitted, "but not for the reason you think. I regret ever starting this affair. I regret the choices that led us here, but what I regret most is the pain I've caused you. Seeing it on your face, knowing I'm the reason for it, it's tearing me apart inside. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I can't even forgive myself." Jeff's expression remained impassive, and I knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long, painful, and uncertain, but I had to try. I waited, hoping Jeff would respond, but he stayed silent. His expression shifted between pain, anger, confusion, and something that might have been love. When he finally spoke, his words caught me completely off guard. "Did you know," he began softly, "that every morning I'd wake up and just watch you sleep? Or after I'd get out of the shower, I'd sit on the chair next to the bed and look at you?" I nodded, my throat tight. I had caught him a few times, opening one eye and asking, "What are you doing?" He would just smile, chuckle softly, and lean in to kiss my forehead. "You look so peaceful," he continued now, his voice thick with emotion. "So beautiful. At least to me. I'd watch your face, trace the lines and curves, study how your nostrils flared when you exhaled, and notice how your lips would part slightly, like you were dreaming. Maybe about me. Or so I thought. Now I wonder if you were dreaming about him." He paused, his gaze distant. "I used to think I was the luckiest man alive to have you in my life. You were my angel, the light that made my dull, gray world vibrant. But now the light's gone. You took it with you." I opened my mouth to speak, but he wasn't finished. "Since Wednesday, I still wake up smiling, thinking about how much I love you and how lucky I am. But then I roll over to find the bed empty, and it all comes rushing back. The memories of what you did and the pain. It's there every single morning. The only difference is that every day I love you a little less, and the pain dulls a bit more." His words cut deep, confirming what I already feared. My mother had been right. I'd waited too long. If I had come home sooner, maybe I could have salvaged something. But now it felt too late. He'd spent days replaying everything, and I could see his decision to leave me was likely final. "Jeff, please don't rush this," I pleaded. "I know I've hurt you in ways I can't undo, and I don't deserve forgiveness. But I'm asking for a chance to make things right, to show you I can be the wife you deserve. Please, just one more chance." He didn't answer immediately. Tears welled in his eyes, and one rolled down his cheek. Without thinking, I reached up and wiped it away with my thumb. "I told myself I'd never cry over you again," he said, his voice cracking. "But here I am." He paused, then continued. "You asked about the video. When I said it was the second time I cried for you, do you really want to know about the first?" "Yes, Jeff. Please tell me," I whispered. He took a deep breath. "Lauren, I fell in love with you the moment you stepped out of your dad's car that summer. Those months were the happiest of my life. But the worst moment came when you left me at the harvest dance for someone else. You humiliated me in front of everyone, especially Billy Barber and the football team. I cried myself to sleep so many nights after that. He looked at me steadily. So, Monday night was the second time I cried for you. And now, this tear you just wiped away, that's the third. Jeff, I'm so sorry, I said, my voice shaking. I know I keep saying it, but it's true. What I did was unforgivable, and I regret every second of it. I was selfish and stupid, but I swear it meant nothing. I'll never see him again. I don't want anyone but you. He shook his head, sadness etched across his face. Lauren, I can't compete with him. I won't. And it's not just him. If we stayed together, I'd always be competing with his memory, trying to measure up. That's not a battle I'm willing to fight. There's no competition, Jeff. No one compares to you, I said desperately. You'll never understand how this feels until it happens to you, he replied quietly. Then he stood as if to leave. My heart dropped, and I felt my world shatter. I jumped up, knocking my chair over as I wrapped my arms around him. Don't go, Jeff. Please don't leave me, I sobbed. When I saw your letter at the hotel, I realized how much I'd messed up. You and our marriage mean everything to me. Please forgive me. Please come back. He hesitated, then gently hugged me, his hand brushing through my hair. After a moment, he pulled back, placing his hands on my shoulders and looking into my eyes. Lauren, he said softly, I used to picture our future so clearly. A house with a white picket fence, 2 boys, and a little girl who'd have me wrapped around her finger just like her mom did. I saw us celebrating anniversaries, raising a family, growing old together. I believed we could weather anything because we had each other. But now, there's nothing. Just a black hole where all that love used to be. He stepped back, his voice distant. I need to go. There's something I have to do. Don't leave, I pleaded. We have so much to figure out. What could possibly be more important than saving our marriage? I need to write a thank you letter, he said flatly. A thank you letter? To who? For what? I asked, confused. Ronnie Millsap, he replied, heading to the door. What does Ronnie Millsap have to do with this? I called after him, bewildered. He turned, a faint smile on his lips. He helped me leave my cheating wife, he said, whistling the tune to Stranger in My House as he walked out.
5 years had passed when my wife Nina called out, asking me to bring the car around. We were heading to my parents' house for a Memorial Day gathering. Stepping out the back door, I paused to take in the view from the bluff overlooking the beach, the Connecticut coast visible across Long Island Sound. My life was worlds away from the days of renting a small house on Nassau's shoreline. Now we lived in Old Town Mattoon, a significant leap from where I'd started. As I entered the garage, I contemplated which car to take. I looked over the 10 bays in our newly built garage before settling on number 5. With a press of the remote, the door slid open, revealing my latest prize. The sunlight glinted off the gleaming black paint and polished chrome of my 1961 Ford Thunderbird convertible. Its rebuilt Ford 390 V8 engine roared to life as I turned the key. Backing it out into the circular driveway, I couldn't help but admire the car once more. I lowered the convertible top and parked in front of the house. Nina emerged with our son in her arms, frowning as she saw the car. Jeff, I can't ride in that with the top down, not with the baby. Laughing, I replied, Fine, I'll put it up, but you have to admit it looks better with the top down. If you want me to ever ride in it again, you'll put it up now, she retorted with a smirk. The memory of our first drive in the Thunderbird crossed my mind. Back then, Nina had insisted on the top being down, playfully reminding me of her effect on me. Smiling, I raised the top, just as I had that day. Nina always knew how to get her way. I met Nina 2 months before my divorce from Lauren was finalized. She was introduced to me at a fundraiser hosted by my boss, Mr. Diamond, president of the bank where I worked. The Diamonds had started a charity for Romanian orphans, inspired by their adopted daughter. Though their marriage had ended, their shared love for the child kept them working together. As one of Mr. Diamond's trusted employees, I was expected to attend the $1,000 per plate dinner. Arriving at the event, I noticed an empty seat next to mine at the head table, with a card that read, Reserved for Miss Kiranova. Soon, a stunning woman in black arrived. Mr. Diamond smiled as he introduced her as Janina Kiranova, a Victoria's Secret model, board member for the charity, and a Romanian orphan who had overcome a challenging childhood. Nina and I connected almost instantly. She shared her harrowing experiences growing up in Romanian orphanages, and her story deeply moved me. As the evening went on, she turned down several offers to dance, which led me to assume she wasn't interested. Then, unexpectedly, she asked me to dance. Of course, I said yes. 2 years later, we married at Mr. Diamond's Southampton estate. The lavish event was unforgettable, though I couldn't help but notice Mr. Diamond's new wife seemed quite young at 35 compared to his 61. Still, he appeared happier than ever. Nina and I enjoyed an amazing first year of marriage, during which she surprised me by expressing her desire to start a family. "Are you sure about this?" I asked. "Having a baby could put your modeling career on hold." She looked at me with unwavering determination. "Jeff, the one thing I want more than anything is to have a child with you, maybe even more than one." Grinning, I replied, "Then let's start now." We both laughed as we headed to the bedroom. A year and a half later, our son, Jeff Jr., was born. He was the light of our lives. That morning, as I loaded him into the back seat of the Thunderbird, I thought about how the car's only non-original part was the air conditioning, a worthwhile addition since Nina hated anything that might mess up her hair. When we arrived at my parents' house, the backyard was already buzzing with activity. My dad was grilling burgers and sausages, and the smell wafted through the air. But as we approached the patio, I froze. Sitting at the table with my mom were Lauren and her mother, Cheryl. My stomach tightened as I watched Nina, carrying Jeff Jr., walk over to the table. My mom eagerly took her grandson into her arms. Fuming, I stormed over to my dad at the grill. "What the hell are they doing here?" I hissed. "Keep your voice down," he warned. "Your mom invited them. She and Cheryl have gotten close since Frank passed. Lauren's had a rough time, especially after dealing with Billy Barber. Your mom thought it was the decent thing to do." I sighed, swallowing my frustration. So much for having a relaxing Memorial Day. After meeting Nina, I found out Lauren had married Billy. I never thought she'd make such a poor choice, especially after cheating on me with Jim Beckman. I assumed Jim would end up divorced, but his wife stayed with him, probably for their kids' sake. For a while, I hired a private investigator to follow him. Whenever he came close to landing a good job, I spread rumors about him being unreliable, and he'd lose it. This continued until Jim and his wife eventually suspected I was behind his repeated failures. One day, Jane Beckman called me directly. She asked if I was the reason Jim couldn't keep a job. Before I could answer, she explained how it wasn't just Jim who suffered. It was her and their 2 children, too. She acknowledged that what Jim did to me was terrible, but pointed out that she never retaliated against my marriage. I didn't outright admit my involvement, but I assured her Jim wouldn't have trouble finding work anymore. She thanked me for that and apologized for Jim's role in breaking up my marriage. Afterward, I let go of the detective and all the resentment I had toward Jim. It felt like a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. Later, I picked up my son from Nina and decided to stop by to say hello to Lauren and Cheryl. Sitting on a bench near the kitchen, I held my baby while Cheryl came over. She knelt beside me, gently hugging my son and playing with him quietly for a few moments. Then tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at me. "He should have been my grandson," she said, her voice trembling. "I'd make the best grandmother. You know that, don't you, Jeff?" Her words caught me off guard. I looked at her closely, noticing for the first time how much she'd aged in the past 5 years. Our divorce must have been hard on her. Cheryl had always liked me and was overjoyed when Lauren and I got married. "I know you would have been, Mom," I said softly, using the term she once asked me to call her. "You were a great mother to Lauren, and I know you'd have been an amazing grandmother." She smiled faintly, her eyes still misty. "Thank you, Jeff. I've missed you so much these past 5 years, and congratulations on your promotion at the bank. Your father told me you're second in command now." "Yes," I replied. Mr. Diamond stepped down under pressure from the board. Howard Goldman took over as president, and he promoted me to executive vice president of operations. If I keep my head down, I'll probably be next in line when he retires. Cheryl smiled and said, "Jeff, Lauren wanted to talk to you, but she's afraid to approach. Should I tell her it's okay?" "Of course," I said. "It's been 5 years. I think we can talk civilly now." She returned to the table and passed the message along to Lauren. Before Lauren could come over, Nina approached me first. "Be gentle with her," Nina said softly, her eyes filled with concern. "She's fragile. Don't upset her." I nodded, understanding the weight of her words. Nina stepped aside as Lauren walked toward me. "Hey, Jeff, you look good," Lauren said with a tentative smile. "You too," I replied warmly. She hesitated for a moment, then said, "Nina's beautiful, Jeff, inside and out, and she's a good man." "Thank you," I said sincerely. "I'm lucky to have had 2 amazing wives." "That's not true," Lauren said, shaking her head. "I might have been attractive on the outside, but not on the inside." "That's not fair to yourself," I countered. "You were beautiful inside and out. Jim Beckman dazzled you. Maybe it was something I did that drove you away." "No," she said. "That's not it. Do you remember the dance with Billy Barber? What you did for me there?" "No, Jeff. It's me. There's something broken inside of me that ruins good things." She paused, then changed the subject. "Mom told me about your promotion. I always knew you'd rise to the top." "A lot of good things have happened in the past 5 years," I said, glancing at Nina and smiling. When I turned back, I saw Lauren looking at Nina too. She smiled faintly before continuing. "There's one thing I need to clarify from back then," she said. "I didn't want to bring it up, but it's been bothering me. Do you remember that phone call when I called you an idiot? I want you to know that was the first and only time I ever said that, and to this day, I don't know why I did. But that's not the main thing. I also told Jim how successful I knew you'd be, how you'd become the bank president and earn so much money. I realized it might have sounded like I was only with you for financial reasons, but that wasn't it at all. I was always so proud of you, Jeff. I just wanted to be by your side when you achieved your goals." "When I first heard it, I thought it was about the money," I admitted. "But Nina listened to what you said and suggested I misunderstood. She thought you weren't putting me down. You were proud of me. That changed how I felt about it. That's when I started forgiving you." Lauren nodded, her voice softening. "Thank you for what you did for Jane Beckman. She called me crying after she talked to you. I told her to call you herself, and I gave her your number at the bank. She later told me Jim finally got a job that could support their family. She wanted me to thank you." "I'm glad things worked out for her and the kids," I said. "I didn't think about them at the time, but I'm relieved it's over." We stood and hugged before returning to the table. Lauren cried happy tears while Nina smiled warmly at me. We spent the rest of the day enjoying each other's company. On the drive home, with the convertible top down, I felt like life had truly turned a corner. It was another beautiful day.